Hello and welcome to the next video in which I will show you how to work with Spring for GraphQL and Kotlin Coroutines. To be more specific, we'll learn from the very basics how to prepare a GraphQL schema, then I will show you what imports are necessary to work with suspended functions, and on top of that we'll see how to do queries, how to handle mutations, and additionally how to work with exceptions in Spring Boot project. Without any further ado, let's head to work. So as the first step, let's prepare a brand new project, and to do so, let's navigate to the Spring Initializer page, so start.spring.io, and we'll configure our project in here. Of course, if you are working with Ultimate Edition, you can do that as well in your IDE. When it comes to the project metadata, first of all, I would like to select Gradle Kotlin. The language will be Kotlin as well. For the version, I will leave the latest stable one. The metadata, those are totally up to you. For my case, con.coderc, let's call that GraphQL description. I will get rid of this one. And for the Java version, I will specify 24. Nevertheless, when it comes to the dependencies, we'll have to import two things in here. The first one will be Spring Reactive Web, so Spring Reactive Web, and the second one will be Spring for GraphQL. GraphQL, Spring for GraphQL. So, thanks to the first one, Spring Boot configures a reactive web stack based on the project reactor and Netty instead of Tomcat. And given that we would like to work with Kotlin Coroutines, then this is a must-have for us. Additionally, we go for the Spring for GraphQL that is built on top of GraphQL Java, and moreover, this is the successor of the GraphQL Java Spring project from the GraphQL Java team. So that's all what we need in here. So as the next step, let's hit generate. And let's download the zip package. So after that, let's navigate to downloads. I have that opened in here, and let's extract this zip package. So what I need to do, extract all, hit extract, and that's all. With that done, we can import that to our IDE, and as usual, I will be using IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition. So on my case, and in here, users, downloads, where I have that, and let's find, yep, that's it, the directory with this small black icon. Let's hit OK, trust the project, and in the meantime, IntelliJ will be syncing the project and also fetching all the necessary dependencies so you can stop the video, pause the video, and resume when that is finished for you as well. Alright, so when we see that Gradle finished synchronization, let's take a look if our application actually starts. And for that purpose, let's go to src, main, Kotlin, and GraphQL application. Let's wait a second, and let's click on this green icon to make sure. Right, and we can see that Netty started on port 8080, and that means everything finished successfully. So with all of that done, we can finally define GraphQL schema. And if you've ever worked with GraphQL before, then you know that compared to the rest, everything starts with the schema definition. And if you haven't, then I highly encourage you to navigate later to this documentation. You will find the links in the description for this video and in the comment section, and spend some time figuring out what exactly it is. But long story short, GraphQL schema is a file typically written in schema definition language that describes how our API clients can interact with our server. Alright, so to be more specific, inside it we define the structure of return data as well as how the consumers can fetch or send us the payloads. And even though it may sound like a GraphQL substitute for OpenAPI specs, well, it is something more, because in REST, OpenAPI docs are a nice addition to the project, alright? So it is not necessary, you will still be able to deploy, etc. And in contrary, in GraphQL, our services continuously utilize the schema definition to validate and execute requests against it. And again, if you would like to learn a bit more about that, I highly encourage you to check out the docs. But for now, let's get back to our Spring project and let's start defining the schema. And for that purpose, let's navigate to resources. And in here, we already see that there is a GraphQL directory in it. I'll put the schema.graphql file. So new file, schema.graphql. Wonderful, we can even install the GraphQL plugin. I encourage you to do so. Let's hit OK. It should be fast, but we'll have to restart our IDE. Let me close the Gradle toolbar, and again, as I mentioned, inside the GraphQL schema file we'll be defining, and for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll define 2 queries, 2 mutations, and also all the necessary types for that. So firstly, let's type with type and query. And long story short, queries define how a client reads data, and every GraphQL schema must support them. So mutations, for example, are optional. Nevertheless, we have to have some query. And the first one will be the article. We'll be doing a simple system managing articles with comments and authors. So let's start defining this article, and the type of the argument will be identifier and article. We don't have this type, so that's why it is red right now. Don't worry about that, we'll get back to that in a moment. Nextly, let's go for the second query, articles, that we'll be using to fetch the list of all articles. We will not do any additional search capabilities, so articles, and in there, article, and this. So you may find this exclamation mark a bit weird, because the main difference between GraphQL schema and Kotlin is that in GraphQL, this means that this is a nullable type. And in here, we define the article that is of not null type. So null can never be returned in here. And to be more specific, this notation means that we would like to return always a not null list of not null article values. So quite contrary to the Kotlin, where on the other hand we define explicit nullable types. And that's the main reason, the difference in here. Nextly, let's define some mutations. So just like queries define how API clients can fetch the data, mutations define how client modifies the data. So again, type mutation in here, and let's provide the first mutation, create article, and I would like to pass here the input. The input will be called create article input, and just like in Kotlin we will create classes, in here we'll later put the definitions for our arguments. And this time, whenever we create a new article, I would like to return one article. Excellent. Then add comment, and in here I would like to put 2 arguments. Firstly will be the article identifier, and then the input article ID of type always not null. Input must be add comment input as well, not null, and we'll return a comment, nullable type this time. Alright, so with that done, we can define inputs. And inputs basically are the structures in schema GraphQL used to pass the structured arguments to our mutations in queries. So just like we'll have the types, we have inputs as a separate type in GraphQL schema. And firstly, let's define the create article input. I would like this to take 3 values. So first, let's start with input, create article input, and this will have 3 fields: the title, the content, and the user ID. Title of type string, not null, content string value, user ID of type ID. Then let's add the second one, the add comment input. So again, input, add comment input, and this time I would like to pass 2 things, user identifier and comment. User ID, string value, content, string value as well. And with that done, we can define the types. And the difference is that whenever we define some returned type, then we use the type keyword, type user, and in here, ID of type ID, name of type string. Then we have the article, type article, and this time I would like to have a bunch of fields like ID, title, content, author, comments, and created add to add some timestamp to that. So ID of type ID, title will be a string value, content will be string value as well, author will be of type user, because every in here we'll put a parent-child relationship. Every article will have some user, and we'll have a bunch of comments, and typically this will be the array of comment type, and again, this time I would like this to also be an always not null array of not null comment type. And lastly, I promise to add the created at as a string value as well. Lastly, type comment, and let's scroll down a bit, maybe ID of type ID, not null, content I would like to be the string value, author will be the user as well. Excellent. So at this point we can see that we do not have any more errors. Wonderful. So let's rerun our application once again. And basically you can see that nothing happened because of one issue. The file should be called schema.graphqls instead. So now when I rerun the application, Shift plus F10 for example on Windows, as the shortcut, let's wait for a second. And we can see that Spring Boot on the startup verifies our schema. So it figured out that we have unmapped fields because, well, that's what we did. We defined queries, articles, we defined two mutations, create article and add comment, but we do not have any handlers in our code for that. And that's what we are gonna do in a moment. But before we do that, let's create modules. And basically, well, in your project, if you would like to, you can use some, for example, DGS generator, something like that, that is capable of generating classes, even Kotlin or Java data classes from schema GraphQLs. On our end, for the simplicity, I will simply define that as data classes. So for that purpose, right mouse button on con.coderc.graphql, and in here, instead of class, I would like to define the file, and this will be kept as models. So we'll keep all the models in our in this Kotlin file. Useful in IntelliJ will be to bring that on the right side. And here, let's start defining. So the first one will be the user data class user, and I would like to map both fields. Val ID will be a string value, val name will be a string value as well. We need to switch to the opposite, that in Kotlin nullables are defined explicitly instead of not nulls. Anyway, nextly let's add the article, data class article, and in here val ID of string type, title string type, content string type, author ID will be a string value, val created at will be a string value as well. So in here, in our schema GraphQLs, we defined the relation for the author, for the user, but in our data class we reflect the author ID just like you would do when, for example, creating some SQL database table. Nextly, data class comment, and in here val ID will be a string value, content will be a string value as well, article ID, again, just like we did string value, just like we did in there, and lastly, user ID will be a string value. Then, two other things, data class will be the first one, create article input. So this will be a data class to which the payload will be deserialized. Val title string, val content string value, val user ID will be a string value as well. Lastly, let's add the add comment input. Data class add comment input, and in there val content will be a string value, val user ID will be a string value as well, trading commas. Wonderful. So at this point we can start learning how to add handlers for our queries. So let me close this tab, And in here, before we head there, let's add the article service. This service will be, well, it will be kind of in-memory database based on mutable lists. So right mouse button on our package, new Kotlin class file, and this time I would like to introduce the object. So you can scroll down to the object and call that article service. As we are working with Spring Boot, let's mark that as component so that it will be created as the component as a bean and injected to later to our controller. And in here, the first thing I would like to do will be the mutable list of articles. So private vol articles. This will be a great starting point for you so that later you can integrate with whatever database you would like to use underneath. List of, and in here, let's add a bunch of articles. So article, and in here, useful thing, Alt plus Enter, and specify all remaining arguments by name. And firstly, the ID will be article ID 1. As the title, let's go for article title 1. For the content, article content 1. Author ID will be user ID 1. This is important because later we would like to do an actual connections, all right? For example, and create it at local date, time, now, and toString. Awesome. Let's now go for trailing. Let's select this value, Ctrl plus D or Command plus D to duplicate, and this will be faster for us. In here, let's only change the ID to 2, the title to 2. In here, user ID, let it be 1 as well. In here, let's go for 3, and user ID, for example, 2. Then let's add the function that we'll later use to find the article by ID. And I would like this to be a suspend function to prove the point, but I'll do a simple dummy thing calling the delay function so that this will be an actual suspend function. Find article by ID, it will take the identifier, and this will be a string value. So as usual, the article can be found or not, and that's what we will do in here. Equals, or maybe not equals, let's start the block, and as I mentioned, the first thing, delay, and let's put 100 milliseconds, and let's return the found article. So return articles dot first or null value, it ID equals to the identifier that we pass as the value to our function. So at this point, again, we have a dummy service slash repository that we'll use in a moment. So with that done, let's add the article controller. Right mouse button on com.coderc. In here, article controller. And firstly, we'll map that, we'll mark this with controller annotation. Controller annotation. And thanks to that annotation, all the methods inside our article controller that we will later annotate with schema mapping annotation will be treated as handlers. So just like in REST, we have a REST controller and we map the functions using the get, post, etc. mappings. This in here will be using the schema mapping, but instead I can use the for queries, query mapping. And when I open up this annotation, let me download sources. Wonderful. And now we can see that this is meta annotation that is mapped with schema mapping. And that's what I said. So in our tutorial, we will be using query mapping, mutation mapping, or alternatively, if you would like to work with subscription, as you may have guessed, you can use subscription mapping, but those are nothing else than the schema annotations, all right? Meta annotations. Wonderful. So at this point, as I mentioned, we need a handler. So this will be nothing else than a suspended function called article, and we must argument to use the argument with our input, so ID string value. And again, it will return article or null value. And what we will have to do next will be to inject the article service. Private vol article service of type article service. and let's invoke our function. That's all we need to do. Find article by ID and let's pass ID. So you can find this pretty similar to working with REST API where we use the request body annotation. Excellent. Let's rerun our application then. It works. We can see that unmapped fields, this one disappeared. We have the article. We do not have articles, so that looks good. So for the testing, you can use whatever you want. You can use Postman, you can use Insomnia. I'll show you the GraphQL. That is the IDE for testing GraphQL APIs, and that is built in to the Spring Boot GraphQL. So let me stop the application. And as the next step, let's go to Resources. Application properties, I'll rename that to YAML. That's my preference. Instead of properties, I do prefer working with YAML. All right, let me dismiss. And in here, first let's convert that to a YAML format. All right, so we have Spring application name. Additionally, under the application, I would like to add GraphQL enabled true. So as you may have guessed, this way we should enable the GraphQL. And what do we need to do? Next will be to open up our browser. So let's go to our browser. And in here, localhost 8080, because this is the port that we are running application on, GraphQL. Let's hit enter and wonderful. Let me get rid of that. And excellent. We can see that by enabling that, we can use that without any additional application like Postman. But the choice is, of course, totally up to you. So with all of that done, let's start writing our first query. So this starts with query. And in here, I can provide a random name, some random name. This is totally up to us. On the other hand, inside it, we must point to our query name. And we can see that thanks to the schema GraphQLs, GraphQL is already aware of what is happening inside. And what we had is the article. So let's go for article. Let's specify the ID. And I would like to find the article ID 1. And as it happens in GraphQL, we must provide a list of fields that we would like to return. That's all GraphQL is about, right? ID and, for example, title. That's all we would like to get in response. Let's run. And unfortunately, we can see that this failed. And basically what you see in here is a standard message that is thrown for any unhandled exception. Moreover, let's open up IntelliJ. So let's go to the application. Let's open up in here, scroll up a bit, and we can see the exception, unresolved, no class def, error, blah, blah, blah. And we can see no class definition found, error for org, Spring Framework, data util, Kotlin reflection utils. And this all is caused by usage of suspended functions. Without that, that wouldn't be the issue. And what we can do right now will be to hide it. Let's stop the application and let's navigate to build Gradle KTS to fix that. And where we have the implementation, let's add a new one for Spring Data Commons. Implementation, let's open up org Spring Framework dot data colon Spring Data Commons. Now let's click on this elephant icon, or you can do that exactly the same from Gradle toolbar and here to sync the Gradle project, and let's wait for it to fetch the new dependency. If anything happens bad, you should see the exceptions and errors thrown. Anyway, we can see that nothing happened, so we can run our application. Shift plus F10 or just point to this green icon in here. We can see nothing bad happened in here, so let's get back to GraphQL. And right now, when I run, I expect that everything will be working perfectly fine, and that is the case. So at this point, we know how to expose the suspended function, so it's time to learn how to work with Kotlin flow, and basically this will be pretty similar. So as the first step, let's get back to IntelliJ. Let's close this. Let's stop this one and let's open up article service. In here, I would like to add one more function, find all articles, and this one will be returning a flow of article equals, and then articles. Let's import the flow, Alt plus Enter, and in here as flow. And this function, this extension function, actually will produce the code flow from our list. So as the next step, let's get back to article controller and we'll do exactly the same. We'll map our handler with query mapping. Function articles, and now this should return a flow of article equals, and we'll simply invoke our function find all articles. Now Shift plus F10, let's rerun the application. Let's wait for it to run. Splendid, let's get back to here, and that's also cool. We can put a bunch of queries inside articles, and this time I would like to return, for example, ID, title, and created at, let's say. Let's run the application, Ctrl plus Enter actually, to make that faster, so we can see for the article, we are getting this, for articles, we are getting all 3 articles back, and that proves that everything is working perfectly fine. But as you may have guessed, in our schema definition, we mapped additional fields, also the mappings for author, for ID, for name. For example, when you go for the articles, I would like to get the author as well, right? Author, and for example, for author, I would like to get ID and get the name. When I now go for Alt plus Enter, Ctrl plus Enter, we can see that the field at path articles author, so in here author, was declared as a non-null, but the code involved in retrieving data has wrongly returned a null value. In our case, this simply means that we do not have a handler for our author fields. So as the next step, let's get back to our pseudo repository and let's introduce 2 more lists for users and for comments, so that later we'll do the connections between all of them. All right, so let me close that. Let me stop the application and let's get back to article service. As I mentioned, firstly, let's add a new list, private vol users equals mutable list of, and user will go for ID equals user ID 1, name equals user name 1, again semicolon, control or command plus D to duplicate 3, 2, ID 2, ID 3, wonderful. And similarly, let's do for the comments, let's add a bunch of comments. So private vol comments equals mutable list of, and in there comment ID equals comment ID 1, content content 1, article ID, and for example article ID 1, user ID 1, for example, Ctrl plus D, Ctrl plus D, Ctrl plus D, this one will be comment ID 2, 3, 4, comment content 2, 3, 4, article ID, let's go with 4, 2, 4, 3, that's totally up to you. For example, wonderful. Lastly, let's add 2 functions to find user by ID and to find comments by article ID. So the first one will be a suspended function, so suspended function find user by ID, and again string value, it will return the user or null. In here, let's open up brackets, delay. The first thing to make this the actual suspended function, return users dot find first or null it ID equals to the ID passed to the function. And lastly, as I mentioned, find comments by article by ID. Find comments by article ID, and in here ID string value, and this will return a flow of comment type. and in here equals. So what we'll do, comment a simple filter. Filter it article ID equals to the ID passed, and again we'll do exactly the same as previously as flow to create the code flow from that. So with that done, we can add a schema mapping. So let's get back to the article controller, and in here let's add a new function, schema mapping, the annotation that we saw already. And firstly, I would like to create the function. Let me actually go to the schema GraphQL, and this one will allow us to read the author for the article. And let me show you how it is done in controller. So fun author, this will be the name, and in here let's inject the article type user. So Spring Boot will be smart enough that whenever you got this instance of article, please find me the author for this one. So what we can do in here, we can invoke the article service, find user by ID, and let's read the identifier from the article. Article dot user ID, author ID, author ID, correct. And in here we'll do a small uncool thing. Well, typically in your production ready code project, you do not do that. This is bad. This is double exclamation mark, and this can cause the null pointer exception. So you don't want to do that. Anyway, for the learning purposes, that's not what we should focus on. Wonderful. So we have one. I would like to have exactly the same function, but this time for the comment, because for each comment, I would like to also get the author of this comment. So again, schema mapping, suspend function author, and this time comment of type comment. And this should return the user as well. Equals article service, find user by ID, and this time we'll read this from the comment itself. Wonderful. Lastly, I would like to get a list of the comments for our article. So again, schema mapping. Actually, this time this is a simple function, fun comments, and this will take the article of type article, and it will return a flow of comment equals, and in here article service dot find comments by article ID. And let's read the identifier from our article ID. So again, we can see that when working with Spring for GraphQL, this is tremendously easy to map the parent-child relationship. We simply define the handler that takes the parent as the argument type. So with all of that done, let's run the application. Let's wait for it to start. And when it started successfully, we can see that we have unmapped fields, article comments. So, well, actually, comments. Let's go to schema GraphQL. Let's go to the article. Yep, and it has comment in here. I do not want to have that. Double check. Let's go to the in here. We have article, we have comments. All right, let's run the application once again. You can see that this is actually useful to have that check. And this time we can see that the only unmapped fields are mutations. We don't have mutations. That's perfectly fine. So let's go to the GraphQL. All right. So right now, Ctrl+Enter, we can see that everything is working fine. Next view, author. Let's add the comments. Comments. You can see also this is the case with GraphQL. We have to refresh the page. F5, and this time comments. Wonderful. ID, content, and for example author, the author name. And we can see this is the case. We get the list of articles, we have ID, we have author, we have some comments, we have ID, we have the content of the comment, and for the author I would like to get a name. So that's basically all. That's all for the queries, for mapping queries. So with all of that done, we can add 2 mutations. So firstly, let's get back to our project. Let's stop the application and let's go to the article service. So we'll create a simple function to create the article. Suspended function, create article, and this will take the input of type create article input. And as a response, I would like to get the article. Wonderful. Then delay 100 milliseconds. And lastly, what I would like to do will be to simply instantiate a new article and put that into the list. So return, I will show you a tip, article. Let's open up, Alt plus Enter. Again, specify all remaining arguments by name. This is quite useful. And for the ID, I would like this to be randomly generated. So my favorite way is UUID, random UUID to string. That's perfectly fine. For the title input dot title, I would like to read that. The content input dot content, author ID input dot user ID, and created that. We can do that manually. Local date time similarly now, and to string. This is a string value. So I don't want to only return the article. Also, I would like to go with also articles add it. So it will create a new article instance, it will add it to the list, and lastly it will return this instance. Moreover, we can be even more fancy, use the reference articles add function, the reference to the add function. Excellent. So at this point we can have a beautiful Kotlin code, all right? With that done, let's navigate to the article controller. Let's open up article controller, and in here, let's add the mutation mapping. Again, so this is schema mapping with type mutation. Mutation mapping. When we go to the documentation, you can see schema mapping, type name, mutation. You could achieve exactly the same using the schema mapping. And at this point, suspended function, create article, and it will take the argument, only one argument input of type create article input. And as I mentioned, I would like to return the article. It is not null value. And what we would like to do will be article service, create the article, and let's pass the input. Ctrl Alt L, Shift plus F10, and firstly, let's verify the output. Wonderful, we can see that one mutation, unmapped mutation, disappeared. So let's get back to GraphQL. Can we actually comment this out? We can. Wonderful. F5 to refresh so that the schema is taken. And in here, under that, mutation, some mutation, exactly the same rules. We do not need to match anything, but inside it, create article. And for the create article, I would like to have the input. And the input, this will be this kind of nested structure, title, some courtesy article. Apart from that, content, even more awesome content. And lastly, what else do we have? User ID 3, for example, we have 3 users. And lastly, let's provide what we would like to get in return. So you can see this is awesome that we can get this back, title, content. And for the author, I would like to already get the identifier, but also the name of the author on creation. So with one query, we can do everything that. And this is not working because we have invalid syntax with offending token. All right, let me comment this, everything. This and this as well. Again, Ctrl plus Enter. Wonderful. So we can see that our article was created. We get the ID, the title, the content, and the nested author. And this is beautiful, simply beautiful in GraphQL. We can decide what we want exactly get in return. And at this point, you saw what happens when you have unhandled errors. And let me show you how we can improve that, how we can have the proper error handling. So as the first step, let's get back to IntelliJ. That shouldn't be a surprise. Let me close this one and let's add a new model. So let's go to models. In here, I would like to extend the runtime exception. So I will introduce our custom exception, data class, and I'll call this generic not found. Not found. It will take the MSG of string type and it will extend the runtime exception. runtime exception, and pass our MSG. Ctrl-Alt-L, what's the problem? Well, it must be a val, for example, or a var. Excellent. Wonderful. So as the next step, let's go to the article service and let's add a new function. I'll call this add comment. So let's open up article service, and this time it will be also the suspended function add comment, and this will take two values: the ID of the comment of the article to which we would like to add the comment, and the input, and the input will be add comment input. As a response, I would like to get the comment. And in here, the first thing, similarly, just like previously, let's add a small 100 milliseconds unnoticeable delay. And thirdly, I would like to make sure that we have the user for whom we would like to add the comment. So users first or null, and in here it identifier equals to the input, and here user ID. So if this is not the case, I would like to throw the generic not found. Throw generic not found, and for example, user not found. Then I would like to create the comment, so return. But before, I would like to take a look if the article is found as well. Articles first or null, it identifier equals to the identifier passed to our function. And if it is not null, then let's do the remaining. So I'll create the comment instance, Alt plus Enter, specify all remaining values for the ID, UUID, random UUID to string value, content will be input.content, article ID will be the ID, passed to our function, user ID will be input.user ID. Ctrl-Alt-L, wonderful. So at this point we can see that the function will not compile because this is a nullable type. So to make this not null, Elvis operator throw generic not found and article not found. Splendid. As the next step, let's go to article controller and we'll have the mutation mapping again. Mutation mapping, suspend, function, add comment, and in here, argument of type ID string value, and the next argument will be of type input, add comment input, and we'll return the comment. Equals article service, add comment, will pass the ID, will pass the input, Ctrl-Alt-L to format the code, Shift plus F10 to run once again. Splendid. So we can see that this complains about unmapped arguments, article controller, add comment. Let's double check. We have ID of stream type, we have input of type add comment input. Let's go, add comment, article ID. Well, that makes sense. Let's get back to article controller. Let's call this article ID. Let's rerun the application. And it will not be possible. Article ID. Now, Shift plus F10. And splendid. You can see that this is really useful. So with that done, let's open up GraphQL. So again, GraphQL, some mutation. Let me comment out this one. Mutation, another mutation. And this time, add the comment. Firstly, article ID. It will be, for example, article ID 1. Let's make sure that the positive case works. Article ID. For the input, it will be user ID with existing user ID 1. Then content, some content. Splendid. Lastly, ID, content, author, and for example, ID and name of the author. Let's run this. We can see that this is running successfully. Now let's take a look what happens if we go for some unknown article ID, and we can see what we already saw. This is unmapped exception, and there is a bunch of ways in which we can fix that, one of which will be global exception handler with controller advice and GraphQL exception handler. So let's get back to IntelliJ. Let's stop the application. Let me get rid of this. Actually, I will get rid of everything. Close all tabs, right mouse button, new, Kotlin class, and let's call it global exception handler. And this must be annotated as the controller advice. Then I would like to handle our functions. So GraphQL exception handler function handle generic not found, and in here exception of type generic not found. So basically whenever this kind of exception will be thrown, this function, this handler will be invoked, and what we can return will be the GraphQL error instance. GraphQL error instance equals, and let's use the builder. So GraphQL error dot new error, and firstly we must set the error type of type error type from GraphQL, and in here we have a bunch of errors like validation error, data fetching exception, blah blah blah. In our case, for such a things like here not found user or article, I will call that data fetching exception. For the message, we can use the message from our exception message, and lastly let's build. This is the builder, Shift plus F10. So now when we rerun our application, I expect that we should get a more descriptive error. So let me rerun this, and wonderful, we can see that we got the array of errors. So basically that's how errors are handled in GraphQL. 200 OK, and the array of errors, we can see that the add comment is null, and we got what we wanted, article not found. So when I change that, this is working. Now I would like to expect that user is not found, and the classification is data fetching exception, and basically that's all for our error handling. And that's all for this video on how to work with Spring for GraphQL and Kotlin Coroutines. I will be forever thankful if you decide to leave a thumb up, leave a subscription, or a comment for this video. See you around, bye!